would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Back from Redmond edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. I am back, folks, and this is especially special. I am recording this show Wednesday, which is the day I'm going to release it. I just wasn't able to do a show for today. Did the two canned shows on Monday and Tuesday. Thanks to those of you who went ahead and bothered to listen to those. Man, I tell you, listenership really does drop when it's not a fresh, shiny new show. But as you all know, I was moving my son up to Redmond, Oregon this last week. We left on Thursday, took 2.2 days to get there. We left relatively early on Thursday, drove through Thursday, slept over on the way, and then stopped again Friday night, and then did the last couple of hours just in time to get him to his orientation on Saturday. It was very, very exciting. For those of you who don't have children of college age, this may not make any sense to you, but it is, and this isn't even a real estate thing. I apologize, but you talk about emotionally significant events in your life, right? One of the few things I remember from my psych courses that I took in college, maybe the only thing, is that in order to make real change in your life requires a significant emotional event. And I've heard motivational speakers, right, refer to it by different things, right? Some people just call it your turning point, whatever. But what's funny is I in my head, I kind of keep this weird little list of things I consider to be significant emotional events, right? I'm sure that on some level we all do that. And what's bizarre is, I take my responsibility as a parent really, really seriously. And I'm sure I'm not unique in that. I'm sure most parents do. And as I'm driving with my 18-year-old son next to me, I am wondering if I have, and at this point, there's nothing else I can do, right? I am about to drive him to a place where I'm going to leave him. And if I want to get there, I'm a 14-hour drive or a 2-hour plane ride to get to him, right? So tons of bad things can happen to my son while I'm not there to help him out. And I'm wondering if I did it right. I'm doing all this, and I'm not a overly crying kind of guy, or I guess I am, but I tend to not want to just put it on display too much. But I'll tell you, it was one of the most emotional things, parting with my son this last weekend, with this dual bizarre thing of, this is my job, I am supposed to prepare him for this, and then let him go and let him do it. And it was almost without doubt the hardest thing I've ever done. And I don't know why. I guess there is this, and believe me, honest, there is a moment here where this makes sense for real estate. I swear to God. It's that self-doubt thing again. And there was this moment, and again, the wisdom comes from my son, the little butthead, who surprises me so often with how just together he is. Because, in my world, I don't want him to be like me. I want him to be better than me, right? I don't want things to stay the same. I want the next generation to do better. And I think you could tell I was doing one of my dad moments when I'm reflecting a little too much, maybe overthinking things. And he's all, "Don't worry, Dad. I got it covered." And it was an awesome moment. And I loved it. And I hope he wasn't lying to me to make me feel better. So anyway, it's a done deal. And of course, because I am an idiot, instead of using the same pace to come home, I drove straight. I left Redmond and drove straight to my place in Morgan Hill, which is south of San Jose, which in terms of actual time on a watch was somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 hours, 14 hours. According to the little timer in the car that I drove, it was 12 hours and 45 minutes of actual drive time. So the days of me being able to do stuff like that and then jumping out of the car and doing exercise and climbing mountains and stuff are long gone. I was wasted, and all day I had all these big plans for yesterday. Blew me right out of the water. Yesterday was a complete gimme. I got barely anything done aside from unpacking. So really, I don't have much of an excuse for no brand new show at 2 a.m. this morning, other than I was just pooped. And of course, in returning, I think it's appropriate to have a casual discussion about what I saw in Redmond while I was there. I did spend some time looking at properties, got my son all settled kind of Saturday, and then Sunday he had some prolonged thing he had to do. Actually, had prolonged things Saturday morning and Sunday. So during those times, there was really nothing for me to do. Instead of driving him from Target and other places to buy personal fans and hampers and sheets and towels and toilet scrubbers and all the other junk you end up buying when you first move into a new place, I found myself doing the real estate version of that, which is driving all over town and looking for sold signs and trying to get a feel for Redmond. Now, I do have one advantage in that I've been to Redmond before. In fact, I've been to the exact same area before. And actually, I've been there several times. Way back in the 90s, I was there. And then, of course, I was there a year ago when my son went to do his sort of this is what this school is day, right? Sort of a application day to get to know things, talk to alumni folks, those kinds of things. And there are several things I noticed that I think anyone who wants to invest in an area should keep an eye out for. And number one on my list, the first thing that hit me was how many commercial spaces have opened up since the last time I was there. Now, DigiPenn, which is the school he's going to attend, is on a road called Willow Road, which goes up northwest away from Redmond. And the approach to DigiPenn from Redmond has got commercial space on either side. And when I say commercial space, I don't mean strip mall style stuff. I mean company style stuff. So larger buildings, those types of things, but also buildings that have been cut up into smaller pieces, right? So you're not renting the entire building. You're renting 800 square feet of it or 1,000 square feet of it or 10,000 square feet of it, whatever your particular needs are. What amazed me was how much square footage there was available for leasing this time versus last time. So let's chalk that up. What's lesson number one learned from Redmond that you can apply everywhere? Take a look around and get a feeling for what you think is going on in the local commercial space. Now, why do I care about that? Now, in this case, there's lots of other things that you can pay attention to as well. If you don't know, Microsoft is based in Redmond, so there's tons of high-tech employment going on there. There's other high-tech companies. So this is a slightly different scenario. You'd want to get an idea, in addition to what I'm talking about, how many people are moving in? Are people tending to move in or out? Is high-tech hiring? And how do you find out that stuff? One great way to find out what's going on with the local economy is to call local employment agencies, contract agencies particularly, because most companies today will start with a contractor and then convert them into permanent. So whenever I go and I look at a brand new area and I'm seriously considering it, and I've already done all my other stuff, right? I've already run through that video that we shared with the members of the Rebel Underground, where we zero in on sub areas within a metro area that we want to focus on. Once I've gotten to that point, and once I'm actually seriously looking at houses and I need to get some more ground truth, find out what's going on. What if you go to any of the popular employment websites and you do a search for a job in that area? How many jobs do you find? And what kind of jobs are they? When you call a contract agency and you talk to a contractor recruiter person and get a feeling for what the market is like in that area, what do they say? Are they hiring more people this year or less people than they were last year? So that kind of stuff. These are all great things to get an understanding of. And in addition, drive the area and see if you're seeing way more vacant space than you are occupied space to get an idea for what direction things are going. And I'll be honest, everything else I know about Redmond, the what I saw in terms of businesses not being there in terms of available space really shocked me. I did not expect that. I expected to drive around this area and see mostly occupied commercial space. There's also, and Redmond is also clearly a town that is in some sort of a weird transitionary state. I went to their, I guess you could call it a promenade mall type of thing. It's the only theater I could find in Redmond is where this is. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it. But I know there's a Macy's in there, and there's there's the usual stuff. But it's an open air mall, so it's not enclosed. And this was a Sunday afternoon, 3:00, maybe 3:30. The place was absolutely vacant. There was nobody out at all. This is a place that tends to be colder, and it was nice and warm. I would have thought people would be out and about, and it just wasn't happening. I was not getting a booming community vibe. Now, I'm not going to come to a conclusion that it's not a booming community based on that limited experience, but it sure did leave me thinking, I need to see more information. I need to get exposure to more data. And if I was seriously looking at getting involved at that point in a serious specific real estate purchase, I would talk to a local real estate person, sit with them at their desk, and go through over. The next step for me would be to go over data, show me average sales prices over the last year. And then when you do that, one other thing, and I'm not even sure we've mentioned this before. I must have at some point, but I think it's been a while. Make sure that when you do this, you're not just looking at the average sales price over the course of a year. I don't want that. You know what? I'm not interested in the average property. I'm interested in minimum 3-bed, 2-bath, right? That's the bread and butter. And for this community, I would actually say your bread and butter is a little broader. This is very much a renting community. This is very much a school supporting community. So I think you could actually get away with 2-bedroom. I'd still go 2-bedroom, 2-bath because it still seems to be very much a roommate setup. So you'd want to have a setup that is attractive to people who may not be family members, but who want to live in a home where they have their own bathrooms. So that would be something I think that would be important. And we can get into that a little bit more in a second because I really got into that specific market in the course of my stay there. But get the data historically on types of properties you're interested in, whether that's multifamily homes or multifamily properties, whether that's 2-bedroom properties, 3-bedroom properties. See what the average price has done in each one of those segments. Don't lump them all together because that might help guide your decision. Remember, we always want to try to take the less traveled path to the cheese. We don't want to follow the rat in front of us because that always means there's always going to be a rat beating us to what we want. So just keep that in mind. Now, one other interesting thing I noticed about this particular market was the activity level at the different price points. Let me give you an example. Sunday afternoon, I start looking for where open houses are. And I do a search on Trulia. I do a search on Realtor.com. I do a search on Zillow. Do a search on the usual sites. I find a grand total of 4 homes that are being held open. Every single one of them is over $1.3 million. I find tons and tons of homes listed below that price. In fact, my initial search was for a home comparable or a property comparable to what my son is currently in as part of the housing for his college. Now, the college doesn't have its own housing, or at least it doesn't have dorm-style housing. It has apartments. He's in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment with 3 other roommates. And so in my head, I'm thinking, well, eventually he might find 2 or 3 people he thinks would be great roommates longer term. So it might make sense for me to purchase a property that would fit that bill and then have it be a rental for his remaining 3 years at this university. And with what his roommates would be paying, the unit would be more than paid for. And everything would be wonderful, right? And then I would simply, if it's doing great and I continue to do positive cash flow, I could hold on to it, or I could liquidate it if I'm not interested in staying in that market at the end of his college experience. So I was very much focused on that, and not a single, and there were tons of them. Everything ranging in price. I found 3 foreclosures, which blew my mind. In my market, you just can't find foreclosures. They're just not happening. In that market, I found 3 properties listed as foreclosures. 2 of them were, from what I could see in terms of their location and relation to other properties of similar size, were anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000 below what would be normal market value in those areas. So clearly, and some of them clearly needed an update. Some of them looked like they hadn't been updated in a very long time or had suffered some deferred maintenance. That looked like interesting opportunities. But that's something else to keep in mind as well, which is also why getting that historical data in a market like this is so important. But what was interesting was, for whatever reason, I don't know how many conclusions to draw from this. I'd want to look at a couple of more weekends, and I plan to do that over the coming month, just to see, well, show me all the open houses and why are all of them focused on this higher end? And my feeling is, a lot of this has to do with real estate activity, right? A lot of the focus on the open houses at the luxury end. And if you're doing those open houses, typically a real estate agent will try to discourage a seller from doing an open house. They'll typically do it less because they think that open house is going to sell the property, and more because they think it's going to get them more clients. So of course, a agent will tend to, if they have a choice between holding open a $500,000 home or a $1.3 million home, where they're going to go hold open that $1.3 million home, because they might just find themselves meeting someone who is shopping at that price point as a buyer that they can then help find a home. So it's simply a money decision. They're going to make more money in commission off that $1.3 million buyer than they are off of someone who's shopping at that $500 price point. The other way to look at this, and I'd need more data on the local market before I could come to the conclusion, this conclusion is that more effort has to be expended to get things sold at the higher end. Now, a little bit of data with the cooperation of a real estate professional would do that for you. Typical pieces of data that we've talked about in the past that you'd want to compile. Days on market, spread out over the last year, 4 properties of that kind. How close it was to list price, that kind of thing. So that you can get an idea. And once you've gotten those numbers, it's going to be pretty obvious to you what the situation is as it relates to the activity in the area. At least in terms of, where do you stand as an investor? Are you in a good position? Are you going to be able to negotiate more? What are the elements at play that indicate you need to either be more aggressive, or that you can be a little bit more passive, or maybe you need to get more creative in finding people who want to sell properties in those markets that you're interested in, because going the normal MLS way just isn't working out. There's just too many people competing with you in that space. Now, I'm just sort of breaking the surface of the water on this particular market. I need to find someone. Now, I do happen to have a listener who's up in Seattle. I'm probably going to reach out to him. I was hoping to actually meet with him over this last weekend, but there just ended up being too many things to do. But I might just go ahead and leverage that relationship and see if we can't find interesting investment properties in that market, just based on facilitating my son staying there and potentially having roommates in the future. Now, before we continue, I want to take a quick break, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. Just back from Redmond, Washington, kind of giving you the lowdown on what I found. And I'll tell you, if I can establish what direction I think the market is going, Redmond looks like a pretty promising place to potentially have a good investment property. I think if you can buy multifamily, that would be the way to go. I was having a hard time finding multi-unit properties in areas that I'd want to invest in. If I want to try to preserve, though, the same distances for my son, for instance, that's obviously one of the main concerns for me. I found units that would actually be better placed at price points where if I do the math and figure out what my son is paying per month for the place he's currently in, and I take into account that the school pays for water, power, and internet, and then adjust my rent accordingly, most of these are positive cash flow right out of the gate with conventional financing. So if you go in there and you put 20% down and work your way through that, and assuming my estimates on property taxes and insurance are correct for the area, they're positive cash flow, but not by much. So it would take a little bit more. In my case, this would be one of those few times where I actually would consider doing a interest-only loan that came to fruition after 5 years and would readjust to a fully amortized loan, simply because my plan would be to liquidate or refi before that comes, depending on what the right decision is, or to sell it. Now, of course, that elevates the risk. That assumes that prices aren't going to drop over that period of time. So those are all things that you'd need to take into consideration based on what your overall strategy is. Personally, I think I could probably come out of that pretty good. When I looked at the numbers, I didn't see huge drops in the last downturn for this particular market. And we're already talking about properties that tend to occupy the lower tier of demand. So I'm not seeing a huge amount of mobility in those prices either. But before we go any further, let's actually take a look at what using sort of the lens that I introduced to the folks in the Rebel Underground. Let's go ahead and jump over to Trulia and see what they have to say about the market. And we'll start with the local scoop section of Redmond. Now, I'm looking at it right now, and the median sales price, according to this site, is $782,000 with a median rent per month of $2,950. Now, of course, if we just use those average numbers, then those rent amounts don't really work. But when we start drilling down and we discover specific properties of specific types, then suddenly things start to look just a little bit better. At least that's how it was when I was looking at specific properties that were listed up on the various real estate sites. Now, as I've also mentioned before, we've talked about analyzing crime statistics. And what's interesting is nothing is happening in Redmond. Particularly if you're looking in Trulia there and you use their overlay, the only place you're seeing any crime at all is down towards Overlake, which is outside of Redmond. If you take the 520 down south and then west, you start to hit some areas around Crossroads, Overlake, but nothing in the area where we'd be shopping, where we'd be looking in this Redmond community. So that's all good news. I think that's great. Having a community that boasts that kind of normalcy, I guess you want to call it, I think is good. So from simply doing an online analysis at that very first level, excellent. We can pretty much do a search for anything within the borders of Redmond and not really worry about whether or not we're going to see a lot of crime happening around our rental property. All right. So if we then look at median sales prices, they have gone up over the last year. They were down around $650,000 in August of last year. And the average is what we just mentioned, $782,000 at this time of the year. It really started to jump in February, where it was at $639,500. In August, it was $640,000. So very little change from August to February. And then it started a steady increase. So it would be interesting to see. I'd want to get more data. Now, the data from Trulia only takes us back a year. But with a real estate agent on your team, you're going to be able to get data probably going back much further. Now, for my area, I can usually generate data for at least the last 10 years. I'm imagining most others will do the same. And the average price per square foot obviously has also gone up. And the median rent has gone up. But what's interesting is during that same period of time when things were flat until February, rents sort of fluctuated. In August of last year, they were at $2,900. They bottom out in December at $2,650. And then in January and February, they're right around $2,700 to $2,800. It remained a little bit flat, but then started a steady increase until they hit $2,950 this month. So if I don't see rent growth that's as robust as price increases, that can sometimes be a little bit of a concern. But one other thing to note is median sales price is actually down. It was 790,000 in July, and it's 782,500 in August. Now, this is something you can kind of expect. Usually, in most markets, in my market particularly, you get a peak in the June-July timeframe. It looks like their market's a little bit different from Morgan Hill on average. But again, run these same numbers based on specific property types you're interested in. In fact, I would run them with not only different bedroom configurations, but also different property types. So run single family residential separately from townhomes and condos. I think you'll find that there's an interesting discrepancy there potentially in this market. And what's funny is I would actually make that a statement that is very true of that market, just because of the way that market is. Tons of apartments in this market. So the average person is very used to renting an apartment. So the move from an apartment to a condo wouldn't be that big of a shock. There's more and more, there's tons of building going on in Redmond, which really offered this odd discrepancy between what I was seeing in terms of commercial space, but obviously investors thinking we need to build more housing units here. Let's see. According to Trulia here, market trends are helping you understand the movement of key price indicators. Trends in Redmond show a 20% year-over-year rise in median sales price and a 2% rise in median rent per month. That's the discrepancy I was talking about between those two numbers that I think you should be aware of. But other than that, this is a pretty promising market in terms of what to look for, and particularly in certain segments of real estate that's available. So this is a market where a lot of the things I've suggested shouldn't be at the top of your list, sort of take a back seat. This is a community where I would not reject condos as much as I have in the past. In my local market, I tend to reject condos because they're just not as common. And what's funny is the perception, right? I use the word condo to really refer to architectural style in this case. I've sold tons of homes that are townhome style architecturally, but are a condo in terms of how the property is owned. Because that's what people care about. People really don't care typically. I'm sure there are always exceptions. But by and large, it's the space that they're living in that they care about. They don't care about whether or not they own the airspace just inside of the unit or whether they own the ground it's on and the walls and everything in it. It's about how you live in the property versus how you potentially own the property. And here in Morgan Hill, condo style living, people avoid it at all costs. Given what I'm seeing in Redmond in terms of what the most popular housing styles are, I'm just not so sure that's going to be an issue. And I'd love to get into some of these apartments. I'm wondering if they're slightly different. Now, in my travels, I also went through Portland and stopped there for a while and got a chance to see gentrification in action. We decided that we would hit what is considered one of the bucket items whenever you're in Portland. And we went to a little restaurant called Puck Puck, which is Thai cuisine. And right across the street, gentrification, brand spanking new apartment building where they've got commercial space on the first floor, retail space, living space above. Within view of Puck Puck, 4 more buildings are going up that are in the exact same mold. And judging by being able to look at the windows into the units, they're appointed very nicely. They are, I guess, what you'd call the New York version of a condo or an apartment. These are nice homes, higher ceilings. They tend to feel a little bit more spacious because generally they are. If that's the kind of space you're creating as a condo, it's got a different vibe than that place with the low roofs, very cramped apartment style living. And I get the feeling that may be what's going on in Redmond, which gives you kind of a different vibe. But you're also getting a different vibe because of the makeup of what's going on there. Now, what's super interesting in terms of the stats I found about Redmond is that 84% of the folks there are homeowners, which seems odd to me given the number of apartments that are being rented. There are tons not only there, but there are tons more being built. I counted at least 8 different apartment buildings being built right around the Redmond town center. For those of you who know Redmond, I was staying at the Hampton Inn right next to the Target, which is right down there. And just on my walk around that neighborhood, I counted 4 different apartment buildings that were being built within that area. So clearly there's a growth factor there. And for me, as someone who's looking at it as an investment, that feels like a pretty good piece of data to hang your hat on, because what that normally means is you're seeing slightly younger folks or new folks to the area who are moving there for jobs. It's a situation where there's growth in employment. And from what I'm seeing, a lot of it is pretty high-tech employment. Other data for the area that I discovered through Trulia was that 27% are single, 37 is the median age, the median household income is $112,000, and 70% are college educated. Interesting to note about Redmond is also it's a very big bike community. It's very bike friendly. So there's a lot of things that make it interesting. But what's really funny is, according to Trulia, 0% commute by bike, 91% commute by car, 7% commute by public transportation. Now, if that data is true, that would mean that a lot of these people must be commuting into another community, most likely Seattle, for their job, which I find to be interesting simply because I saw lots of people on bikes making their way around, and my son has joined the ranks of people who commute to what they do, being a student, by bike. So not sure how much emphasis I should put on that stat. But again, here's the other part. Here's the final thing I'd want to mention about an observation with Redmond. Huge variation in the market. You could absolutely go into this marketplace, and if you want to find dozens of lower end priced properties, sub 400K, you're not going to have a problem finding these. You need to be willing to look in the 2-bed, 1.5 bath or greater zone. I mean, I'm not a studio guy. I don't have a lot of enthusiasm for investing in studios. I don't see them as a great investment. They have the lowest level of desirability in just about every marketplace, regardless of how nice the unit is. So there's that. But I was finding endless options in terms of properties when I did a search on 2 or more beds, 2 or more baths, property of any kind. I was finding a lot of options. And that doesn't even include some of the surrounding areas around Redmond that I think also present some interesting opportunities, whether you want to talk about Clyde Hill, Crossroads, Bellevue, or areas to the north like Kingsgate. Is that what that place was called? Yeah, Kingsgate was one area that I drove around that had some beautiful homes. So different options are available everywhere. And let me suggest that when you finally make the decision to invest in an area, do this. Go through this process to get your ground truth. I absolutely drove an awful long way to get my son up to Redmond, and I absolutely drove around an awful lot to get him all the random junk that someone needs when they move into a new place. However, I dwarfed a lot of that with how much I drove around this community, up and down residential streets, getting a feel for what people do. Lots of folks walking their dog, just being outside, and got a really good feel for the different neighborhoods, and also using the techniques we've talked about on the Rebel Underground, was really able to focus in on the neighborhoods that tend to be more high priced, the areas that tend to be more reasonable, but also the areas that tend to be more desirability because of how great they are when you consider a commute option. So take all those things into account. Figure out the gears of the community you're interested in. Why are people there? If they're commuting out of the area, where are they commuting to? Is your potential investment property located in an area that will make that commute less painful or more painful? So focus on what the properties have to offer to someone you'd potentially market them to. In my case, I would be marketing to my son and his potential roommates. And of course, I want to encourage him to have roommates that are going to the same school he's going. So my particular goal here is a little bit different than what yours would be. But in Redmond, I think you could find some fertile territory. And if not Redmond, all the things we've talked about would absolutely be important elements of any analysis you would do of any community all across the country. All right, folks. I've hoped we've managed to drop a good deal of valuable information here for you that you can apply anywhere in terms of what your investment interests are, whether geographically or what type of property you're interested in acquiring. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say on these subjects. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you all next time.